You've heard of California, New York, and Florida, but Alabama, you might not know much about it, but you will soon. Hello, English learners. Welcome back to the Learn English podcast, the podcast teaching English in context so you can learn naturally. On today's episode, I want to talk about one of the states in the United States of America, and that state is Alabama. If you have been listening to the podcast, then you know that I am from the state of California and that I've done episodes about California. But some of my listeners have left comments asking to learn more about the other states. So on today's episode, we are going to kick off our series about the other states in the United States of America. And we are going to start with Alabama. So if you are interested in learning a little bit about the history, the culture, and just general information about the state of Alabama, well, of course, practicing your listening comprehension, then follow along because we're about to begin. Now let's talk about the great state of Alabama. If you don't know where Alabama is located, it is in the southern part of the United States, right off the Gulf of Mexico. The name Alabama comes from a Native American tribe called the Alabama people. They used to live in the area before they were forced to leave from their land after European colonization and U.S. expansion. Alabama is about the same size as the country Greece. In terms of population, there are about 5.1 million people who live in Alabama. And in terms of GDP, which represents the economic output, the gross domestic product for the state, Alabama has a GDP of over $250 billion per year. That's similar to the GDPs of Ecuador or New Zealand. I found this to be very interesting when I was doing the research for this episode. In the United States, Alabama is known for being one of the poorest states in the country. So for me, I found that to be a little bit interesting because when I would think of New Zealand, I would have a certain prejudice, a certain idea that came to mind. And when I was thinking of Alabama, I had a very different one. But as you can see from the numbers, they are actually roughly equivalent when it comes to gross domestic product. Now, that doesn't mean that the average person who lives in Alabama has the same amount of wealth as the average person who lives in New Zealand. Usually, when we talk about these states that are very poor, there actually are people who are very, very rich, but then there's also a lot of people who are very, very poor. You have this wealth inequality. That's definitely the case with Alabama, and it is the reason why Alabama does have that stereotype. There are some key components to Alabama's economy. One is car manufacturing. There are plants for Toyota, Mercedes-Benz, and Honda. So that does provide a lot of the economic output for the state. The state also has NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. NASA is the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. This is the part of the government that is responsible for space flight. So Alabama does have a very strong tie to NASA, and part of its economy does have to do with aerospace. And besides that, it is also known as an agricultural state. They are known for having peanuts, soybeans, cotton, and poultry. Poultry means chickens, usually. So when you hear the word poultry, what we're usually talking about is chicken farms. As for the history of the state, Alabama was the 22nd state in the United States. It became a state on December 14th, 1819, and its capital city is Montgomery, Alabama. Montgomery is one of the bigger cities in the state, and another relatively large city is Mobile. I did an entire episode on tricky city and state names, cities and states that are difficult to pronounce if you are not a native English speaker. And one of them was Mobile, Alabama. That is just one of my absolute favorite city names to pronounce. I'm not sure why, but anytime someone says that they are from Mobile, Alabama, I just smile. I just think it's an amazing city and state name combination. I'm from Mobile, Alabama. Now, in terms of actual population of people who actually live in a city, the biggest city in Alabama is Huntsville, Alabama. There's about 230,000 people who live in that city. Alabama's state motto is in Latin. I do not speak Latin, so I am so sorry if I mispronounce this, but the state motto is Adamus Cura Nuestra Defendere, which means we dare to defend our rights. This reflects Alabama's culture and sense of independence and sovereignty. Sovereignty means the ability to self-govern and to control your own government. So Alabama definitely has that in its history. I've mentioned this a couple of times here on the podcast, but in the 1860s, there was a civil war in the United States. The reason for the Civil War had to do with slavery. At the time, there were states that banned slavery and then states that had slaves. The Union were the states that wanted to stay together, to stay part of the Union of the United States. And the Confederacy were the states that left the United States, that rebelled against the United States government and formed their own government. Alabama was part of the Confederacy. Alabama is in the southern part of the United States, and it is a place that we call the Deep South. Alabama's history of agriculture is closely tied with this period of time in the United States. Enslaved people were brought from Africa to plantations, which are large farms, and they worked those plantations, which means they harvested crops. So the southern part of the United States was actually very wealthy at that time because they did use this slave labor to help their economy and to raise these products that then they sold to other states and even to other countries. Cotton was a big part of slavery, and that really is still seen in Alabama because cotton is still one of their big agricultural exports. That means that it is something that they do still grow on farms and they do still sell to other states and other countries. Alabama was very closely tied with the Confederacy. It was actually the Confederacy's first capital, and this tie to the Confederacy is still shown in Alabama's state flag. Alabama's flag is relatively simple. It is a white background with a red cross called a red St. Andrew's cross. This flag was adopted in 1895, which is decades after Alabama officially became a state in 1819, and also after the American Civil War. This flag is modeled in part on one of the Confederate States' battle flag. And that's what makes it partially controversial. Because the Civil War was fought over slavery, because this had to do with the rights of human beings, of civil rights, a lot of people look at that flag and say that it stands for a history of racism, of intolerance, of white supremacy. Other people will look at that flag and say that it is historical, that it represents Alabama's history and heritage. They will also argue that that cross is seen on other flags as well. For example, Florida or Scotland also have crosses on their flags. Switzerland has a cross on its flag. So they will say that that cross does not mean racism and it doesn't mean what some people think it does. I don't think the flag is going to change. Personally, I don't think that it will be changed anytime in the near future, but there definitely is an argument for and against it. Because Alabama was so tied to the civil rights movement, there are places that you can go in Alabama if you want to learn more about the history of the civil rights movement. In one of the episodes, actually the first episode we did on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I talked about the Montgomery Bus Boycott. That Montgomery part of the name is referring to the city of Montgomery, Alabama. That was a very important event in the civil rights movement. One of the people who was involved in the Montgomery Bus Boycott was Rosa Parks. There is a Rosa Parks Museum in Montgomery, so if you are ever there, you can go and check that out, learn more about that. There's also the Edmund Pettus Bridge that goes into Selma, Alabama. That is another major historical event for the civil rights movement and in Dr. Martin Luther King's history. Another famous person from Alabama is Helen Keller. Helen Keller was born in June of 1880, and she was someone who had a severe illness as a child. That illness actually made her blind, deaf, and mute. So she was not able to see, she was not able to hear, and she was not able to speak. You can understand how incredibly difficult that would be. There was a woman named Annie Sullivan who came into her life who taught her a form of hand signs, a type of sign language, so she could communicate with people around her. She could communicate with her family. And that really changed everything for her. She actually became a very famous writer, and their story is very well known. We're going to talk about culture and we're going to start with sports teams. In Alabama, football is king, which means that football is the most popular sport. When I talk about football, I am talking about American football, not soccer. Football, at least here in the United States, is normally associated with the National Football League, the NFL. Alabama is too small of a market. It does not have enough people to support a national football team, so there is no professional team there. However, they have some of the absolute best college football teams in the country. I know in other countries, college sports and high school sports are not very important, and people don't pay a ton of money to go and see those games. But in the United States, those teams can be very important, especially in rural communities, communities that do not have a professional sports team. They can be incredibly important, and that's what happens in Alabama. The major university in Alabama is the University of Alabama. They are called the Crimson Tide. So you will hear the phrase roll tide. That is what their fans say to each other when they are supporting the Alabama sports teams. When it comes to their football stadium is called the Bryant Denny Stadium in Tuscaloosa, and it has over 100,000 seats. So over 100,000 people can go and watch these football games. The other major football team is Auburn. Auburn are the Tigers, and they are in the city of Auburn. Their stadium is the Jordan Hare Stadium, and it seats over 88,000. These two teams historically are known for having really good football teams, some of the best in the nation. The southern part of the United States is usually where the national champion comes from because they have such good football programs, and Alabama and Auburn are definitely up there. They do have a rivalry game that is called the Iron Bowl. It is the annual matchup between Alabama and Auburn, and it is one of the most intense games. It usually does impact who gets to go to the national championship game because, like I said, these are usually two of the best teams in the country and they play each other every year. In terms of food, Alabama is famous for its Southern comfort food. Some of the regional specialties are Alabama white sauce, which is a mayonnaise-based barbecue sauce. The southern part of the United States is really known for their barbecue, and so this white sauce is one of the regional things that Alabama has, and something that they do use on their barbecue to give it its own little unique flavor. They also have other traditional southern foods. A lot of southern foods are fried, so they do have fried green tomatoes, which are green tomatoes that are cut up and deep fried. Fried catfish. Catfish is a type of fish that you get in swamplands, so that's another thing that can be deep fried. And then they also have some other southern specialties, such as grits, which is a type of porridge, kind of similar to oatmeal, but it's made from corn. Banana pudding, which is a dessert that is made with bananas. Boiled peanuts, because Alabama is known for growing a lot of peanuts, so people boil them and eat them as snacks. And pecan pie. Now, pecan is a word that can be pronounced two different ways. I say pecan, other people say pecan. I think people from the South say pecan, but I'm not entirely sure. I could be wrong. Pecan is a type of nut and it can be used in desserts. So pecan pie is a pie that has these pecans on the top of them. It's very sweet. I did have an uncle who was from the South and he loved pecan pie. It was one of his favorite desserts. So that is something that you can get when you are in Alabama. In terms of things that you can do, Alabama is on the Gulf of Mexico, so there is a lot of tourism on the Gulf Shore, especially with Orange Beach. Orange Beach is a white sand beach along the Gulf Coast. They also have the Little River Canyon National Preserve. It is one of the deepest canyons in the Southeast and another place that people go to have fun. There's also Cathedral Caverns State Park. It is a massive underground formation. In terms of media, there are a number of TV shows and movies that are set in Alabama. One of the most famous is Forrest Gump. It is a movie from 1994 that starred Tom Hanks as the character of Forrest Gump. His home is in Alabama, so the early scenes of him growing up are in Alabama, and then he returns to his home when he is an older adult. There's also the movie To Kill a Mockingbird, which is in black and white. It's from 1962 and it is based on a book by Harper Lee. That book deals with a lawyer who has to represent an African American man, and it deals with the racial issues that were occurring in Alabama at the time. There's also Selma, which is from 2014, and it is a movie about what happened in Selma when the civil rights leaders were marching across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Specifically, Dr. Martin Luther King was the person who helped lead those marches. The movie covers what happened during those marches, how the situation ended up being resolved. In terms of comedy, there is Talladega Nights, the Ballad of Ricky Bobby. This is from 2006 and stars Will Ferrell, who is a comedian here in the United States. Talladega is one of the cities in Alabama that is known for NASCAR, which is a type of motorsport where people race cars. This is definitely a comedic take on Southern culture and NASCAR in general. It is more of a satire, kind of making a little bit of fun of some of the stereotypes when it comes to the South and NASCAR in particular. Another lighthearted and fun movie is also Sweet Home Alabama. That title comes from a song. There is a song called Sweet Home Alabama by Leonard Skinner. The movie takes its title from that song, but this really doesn't have anything to do with that song, except for that song is played in the movie. The movie stars Reese Witherspoon. This is a romantic comedy, so if you like romantic comedies, if you want to see a love story with a little bit of laughs, or you want something that's not too difficult to follow along with, this is another good option. Something similar is Heart of Dixie. Heart of Dixie is a TV show. It is not a movie, so if you like watching TV shows, you could watch this. It has a character who is a high-powered woman. She is a doctor from New York City, and the character is played by Rachel Blisson. She goes from New York City to a small town in Alabama, where, of course, she's going to find someone to fall in love with, and she's going to learn a lot about herself along the way. And then there is the Bama Rush documentary that is on HBO Max. I mentioned this documentary before. I did an episode on Greek life in the United States. That is the network of fraternities and sororities that exist on college campuses. And I mentioned that there is a trend on social media every August that is called Bama Rush. The sororities, especially at the University of Alabama, are known for having these really beautiful sorority houses. And it became so popular that HBO actually did a documentary at the University of Alabama. So if you're interested in learning more, you can watch that episode that I did about Greek life, or you can watch this documentary on HBO Max. I hope you liked this episode and I hope you found it interesting. I am from the United States and I can say that I definitely learned things when I was researching for this episode. So I hope you did as well. I hope you found this interesting and were able to learn something about the state of Alabama. There are 50 states in the United States. We've talked about California, we've now talked about Alabama, and we will continue this series. We will cover the other 48 states. I'm going to go in alphabetical order, so maybe that's a little bit of a hint about which episode is going to come out next in this series. If you're enjoying it, if you want more of these and you have any ideas for other series as well, please leave a comment. Tell me about it. Tell me what you are interested in so I can continue to plan future episodes. If the podcast is helping you learn English, if you are enjoying listening to it, please consider leaving us a rating on whatever app you are using to listen to this podcast on. You can also tell a friend, tell a family member, tell anyone you know who is learning English. Share the show so we can continue to grow our audience. You can follow us on social media at Learn English Pod. The website is learnenglishpod.com. And remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next episode when it comes out next week. Until then, keep learning English.